What do I mean when I say the Catholic Church should get off the sidelines when one spouse files no-fault divorce? Well, given that marriage is the institution by which God designed to bring human beings into existence with immortal souls, and given that marriage is the cell upon which the whole society is built, this is about marriage. From a Christian perspective, marriage mirrors Christ's love for his church. And in marriage, you have the masculine and the feminine complementing each other. You have two parents cooperating to support one household for themselves and the children. Now, no-fault divorce came on the scenes in about the late 60s and 70s. It was the same period where the U.S. Supreme Court was going to be legalizing abortion, even if a state had a law against it. It started with the Uniform Law Commission. They had a project where they wanted to create a uniform marriage and divorce act, where they wanted all the states to try to get laws about divorce that were going to be the same as each other. Now, it was first introduced as a way for the courts to issue a divorce when both people wanted the divorce. Because without no-fault divorce, if both parties wanted out of the marriage, the only way they could do it is if one was accused of fault. So they wanted it as a way to end a marriage when both parties wanted the divorce. Well, what no-fault divorce has become, it's the tool in the civil court system where one spouse can force a divorce on the other spouse, whether the other spouse is perfectly innocent of any grave fault like adultery or abuse. The courts will force a divorce on children, even if the children don't want it. Tragically, the one choosing to quit their marriage is the one who gets rewarded in the divorce system most of the times. They get custody of the children, and they also get financially rewarded because they receive child and spousal support. People don't know that you can have your children taken away from you by a divorce court if you've done nothing wrong, though it is well documented. For example, Stephen Baskerville, who's a scholar, who's a college professor, has written a book, Taken into Custody. It's the war against fathers, marriage, and the family. He's got 47 pages of footnotes where he's citing all other sources who are also publicizing this problem. Now, most times it's the moms who file a no-fault divorce against the dads, but sometimes it's the dads who file a no-fault divorce against the mom. They just want to get out of the marriage responsibilities. And the mom is left in a situation where the civil courts have no recognition of the father's lifelong, permanent, full contribution that he agreed to give to the marital household when he got married. So the wife is left with the children, but not very much money, and she doesn't have the help from her husband that he promised to give her when they got married. Now, those of us who recognize that this is an injustice are inviting the church to do more. Now, when Catholics marry, they marry in accordance with the rite of Catholic marriage. And we promise certain things. Before we even exchange our marriage vows, the priest asks, "Have you come here freely and without reservation to give yourself to each other in marriage? Will you love and honor each other as man and wife for the rest of your lives? Will you accept children lovingly from God and bring them up according to the law of Christ and his church?" This is covered in marriage preparation. You have to say yes to these questions or you can't get married in the Catholic Church. Then when you actually exchange promises, "I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love and honor you all the days of my life." When you agree to marry as the Catholic Church understands marriage, you're marrying in accordance with the Catholic essential elements, obligations, and rights of marriage. Now those boil down to you're open to children, you're agreeing that you're going to be married for life, and you're agreeing you're not going to commit adultery. You're going to be true to each other. Now there are some cases where it's morally legitimate for Catholic spouses to be separated, and those are covered in the Code of Canon Law. This is much more than the Code of Canon Law. It's a Code of Canon Law annotated, so it includes the codes and notes about the codes. It's from the University of Navarra. It was originally written in Spanish, and it's recommended by the President of the Pontifical Council of Legislative Texts. Now, separation of spouses, Canon 1151, says that Catholics are obligated to maintain a common conjugal life, live together in one house, unless there is a lawful reason to be separated. Now, those include things like committing adultery, being a grave abuser, or if I don't let my husband, for example, practice the faith, or let my children practice the faith, if somehow that was going on in our household, then the innocent party has a lawful reason to be separated, which is totally different than what happens in no-fault divorce. In no-fault divorce, people separate because they're unhappy or not getting the satisfaction they expected. Now, in the Code of Canon Law, there's a section on the procedure for separation of spouses, Canon 1692, and it requires that Catholics cannot approach the civil divorce court to get a decree of separation unless they've gotten the permission from their bishop for their particular circumstances, and they cannot ask for a civil divorce decree that is contrary to divine law. Now, the reason that this canon law was necessary is written in the annotations. It states, since divorce laws have proliferated in many countries, the need to request a diocesan bishop's authorization is a necessary precaution which prevents the fostering of trials whose judgment violate precepts of divine law, to the detriment of the spouses and with risk to the scandal of others. The Vatican knew that no-fault divorce had kicked in by this time. This is 1983. And you're not allowed to get an immoral separation decree from the civil divorce courts. But in the United States, this is not being practiced. That's part of what we're working to do. Now, Christ teaches what we're supposed to do when our brother sins against us. It's in Matthew 18. If you sin against me and you do something to hurt me and it's sinful, I'm supposed to confront you alone first. And if we can work it out and if you can see your error and we can reconcile, that's good. But if you don't listen to me, then I can bring witnesses. And if you still don't listen, then I can take the issue to the church. Now imagine this scenario. You're a unhappy wife. You're very dissatisfied. You're so unhappy that you're despairing and you've lost hope and you think the only solution to your situation is to divorce your husband. Now, you could choose to work with those who have experience helping couples like the Alexander House or Retrovi or Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons, but instead you lose hope, you give up, you're despairing, and you choose that divorce is the route to deal with these issues. Now, from your husband's perspective, he's done nothing wrong that merits the separation of spouses. He's not committing adultery. He's not abusing you. He's doing the best he can. He's a normal guy. But he's looking at losing day-to-day access to his children. The courts are just going to cut the house in half. They don't care about who did what or who's the abandoner. The financial situation of the family is going to be totally ruined. Where you used to have maybe a dad working full-time and a mom taking care of small children at home, or maybe the mom working part-time, where you used to have two adults contributing together to maintain one household, you now have two adults working to support two separate households. It is a financial disaster. From the husband's perspective, he's a recipient of an injustice. But now, when the husband is facing this as a defendant in a no-fault divorce, he should be able to ask the church for help, as in Matthew 18. And what Mary's Advocates has provided is a formal way that he can ask the church to intervene. On Mary's Advocates website, you can find the Vindicate Rights petition. And what this is, it's a several-page document. It's pre-written. All the husband needs to do is fill in the parts that are customized for his own family. When did his wife separate? How much money has gone to lawyers? The form is pre-written, and it's for someone whose spouse thinks they're a good Catholic. In the scenario that I gave, the wife thinks she's a perfectly good Catholic. But if she's forcing a no-fault divorce on her children and her husband, and instead of working to improve her marriage, she's just despairing and going the no-fault divorce route, that's wrong. And the husband now has a formal way to ask the church to investigate and intervene. And the church can find out what she's doing is wrong, and the church can do like it says in Matthew 18. If she doesn't listen to the church, she's supposed to be treated like a tax collector and a Gentile. What he formally is asking is for them to do an investigation and start a contentious case whereby the tribunal will, 1, take necessary action to coerce his wife, hereafter called the respondent spouse, to resume cohabitation. 2, pursue a penal trial if respondent spouse persists in manifest grave sin associated with abandonment. 3, take necessary action to coerce family and friends to cease and desist in the support and encouragement being given to the respondent spouse to continue the separation or pursue divorce. Sometimes someone is paying for the wife's divorce lawyer or paying for her to live somewhere separated from her husband, and the wife has taken the children away from the husband. The hope is that if the wife is approached by the church, she might have a softening of her heart. She might stop believing the lies that the solution to her unhappiness is to get a divorce. And instead she might choose to reconcile with her husband and work with those who have experience helping couples. Now, some people are possibly encouraging her to move forward with her divorce, and sometimes it's even diocesan staff people or priests who could say to her, Well, the reason you're so unhappy hearing what you're telling me is that you're probably really not married, and I've heard of people in your situation who get annulments. We do not have time in this presentation to go through everything about annulments, but I'll say a few things. When the Code of Canon Law was issued in 1983, it had some specifics about granting annulments, and in the United States, a lot of those annulments have been granted for psychic reasons, psychological problems. 25 years later, Dignitas Connubii was issued. Dignitas Connubii is an instruction from the Vatican on instruction to be observed by diocesan tribunals in handling of cases for annulment. When this came out from the Vatican, it's not new canon law so much as it's instruction on how to apply it. Everything in here is citing sources in the original canon law. The Dean of the Roman Rota, that's the highest court of appeal, well, it's the second highest court of appeal in the Vatican, he published a paper talking about this psychological ground for annulment. And he was explaining that when the Code of Canon Law first printed those grounds, the way they're written now, not that they're totally new, but they're written differently in the 1983 Code, the Dean of the Roman Rota is saying that these canons have been applied too laxly. And just to read the three things that he's concerned about, tribunal judges are identifying with Canon 1095 and a grave lack of discretion of judgment. They're identifying minimal preparation for sacramental marriage, insufficient human maturity understood in a general way, or imprudence in behavior. That is minimal marriage prep, simple immaturity, or simple imprudence. Tribunal judges are using those reasons to grant annulments, and the Dean of the Roman Rota is saying to do that is to be too lax. That is not the intention of the canon law, and that's not a ground for annulment. The reason I bring this up about grounds for annulment is that the Vindicate Rights petition can also be used as a counterclaim if the husband was to find himself as a respondent in an annulment. That way, two things are being investigated at the same time. The wife is alleging that their marriage is invalid, and the husband is asking the church to vindicate his and his children's right to have an intact home. Both things are being investigated at the same time. Now, another part of the Vindicate Rights petition is that the husband can write to his bishop and ask that his wife be informed that she can't present herself to communion. This is based on Canon 915, which was first kind of made public several years ago when now Cardinal Raymond Burke was just bishop of the area, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and he was saying that pro-abortion politicians cannot receive communion because if they're approached and instructed that you can't be a pro-abortion politician and call yourself a Catholic at the same time, after they're instructed of that, and if they still say, basically, snubbing their nose up to the authoritative teachers of the church that they're going to call themselves Catholics and they're going to be pro-abortion politicians, they should not be presenting themselves to communion. And further, they should even be denied communion because those in obstinate perseverance of grave manifest sin cannot be presented communion. Now, this applies to an abandoning spouse because the Catechism teaches that divorce is immoral and it is a grave offense against nature. And if this wife is abandoning her husband, reneging on her marital promises, forcing a separation and a divorce on the children and her husband, she is doing something that's gravely immoral and against natural law. If she was instructed by the bishop that she should stop doing this and she should reconcile her marriage, and she basically says to the church, I'm going to do it anyway, then she is obstinately persevering in grave manifest sin, and she should be informed that she can't receive communion. So included in the Vindicates Rights petition, there is this document asking the bishop to get involved and to advise the wife that she can't receive communion. So all of this goes back to getting the church off the sidelines when one spouse files for a no-fault divorce. We bring this to the public because we're confident that people who care about being Catholic and care about following God's plan for humanity, some number of those kind of people will be motivated to reconcile their marriages instead of force a no-fault divorce. And that's the good thing.